What should you do if your spouse is used to controlling everything, turning your days into a real hell? Break up and lose your life or submit and stay alive? Ashley Marie Doolittle was born on May 20th, 1998, in Louisville, Colorado, to Marie and Jeff. Ashley had two brothers, Michael and Brandon. The girl was fortunate to grow up in a family that always supported and prioritized her aspirations. From the time Ashley turned 5, she had her first pony. Her gentle approach to animals and passion for horseback riding emerged at that young age and subsequently became an enormous part of her identity. Above all, Ashley adored horses. This affection eventually transformed into a specific life purpose. Starting at age 8, she participated in equestrian shows and was captivated by the atmosphere. By 2016, Ashley had already been crowned as the rodeo lady-in-waiting at the Boulder County Fair. She had just 1 year remaining to become rodeo queen. A rodeo queen serves as an ambassador and the face of this sport. Before achieving the main title, young women undergo a series of rigorous interviews. Additionally, they must showcase their horsemanship abilities. After coronation, the winner attends various rodeos, hones her skills in workshops, appears in parades, and represents her association or region for 12 months. Ladies-in-waiting collaborate with the queen to embody the spirit of rodeo. This comes with substantial responsibility. It includes helping secure sponsors, fundraising, attending community events, education, and much more. All of this became a significant component of Ashley Doolittle's life. Already in her position as lady-in-waiting, Ashley earned recognition for her dedication to the rodeo community. She had become a role model for other girls dreaming of representing this sport. Schoolgirls interested in horses would often approach Ashley requesting autographs. Despite her popularity, Ashley remained humble and left personal messages for each of her admirers, encouraging them to pursue their dreams. This fact spoke volumes about her character and lifestyle. Ashley was also an active participant in Boulder County's horse program, aimed at inspiring young children to engage in equestrian sports and learn riding skills. She participated in several judging and logic teams, rode horse carriages, and was even named champion in the National Western Individual Competition. Furthermore, Ashley was also one of the founders and twice vice president of the Thompson Valley FFA chapter. FFA stands for Future Farmers of America, an independent student organization for people interested in agricultural development. In fall 2016, Ashley planned to enroll in Colorado State University's college, where she intended to study agricultural business. This was another passion of hers, besides equestrian sports. One could confidently say that Ashley was destined for a bright future on her path toward achieving great goals. She had just graduated high school in May 2016 and eagerly anticipated the next chapter in her life. But all of this was destroyed by the decision of one person, who determined that he would rather take Ashley from this world than let her be with anyone else. And that person's name was Tanner Flores. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. The young people met and started dating in high school in Berthoud, Colorado. These were typical teenage relations, but they couldn't be called a happy love story even before everything went wrong. People said that Tanner attempted to fully dominate Ashley's actions. He began dictating what she could and couldn't do. One of the things that was strictly forbidden for the girl was attending parties when she would be in college. Tanner wouldn't allow Ashley to participate in any recreational student activities. Whether it was jealousy or a desire to keep the girl to himself made no sense, because Ashley was never a partygoer, so there wasn't actually any valid reason for concern, but the mere desire to control another person's life already served as a red flag in this relationship. Based on his behavior, Tanner was an extremely jealous and insecure teenager. The fact that he feared losing Ashley to someone better than him spoke volumes about his personal issues. By controlling her, he attempted to validate himself. Ashley definitely started growing weary of her domineering boyfriend, and fortunately, about a year after meeting him, she realized Tanner wasn't right for her. The high school student decided to break up with him. The constant criticism and restrictions had destroyed any developing feelings in the girl, so the decision to separate wasn't difficult for her. On June 4, 2016, the young couple went for a walk in the park to discuss their relationship. The weather was wonderful, so the conversation happened in pleasant surroundings, even though the topic wasn't exactly pleasant. According to Tanner, the walk and discussion went splendidly. Everything was fine between them. Apparently, the boy didn't understand the message that their relationship was over. Or maybe he understood, but simply didn't want to accept it. When Ashley was relaxing at a cafe with friends the next day, Tanner appeared as if nothing had happened and wanted to embrace her. But for Ashley, everything was finished, and now she didn't want anything to do with him. She ended up quietly leaving while Tanner was distracted. The following day, the young man again started bombarding his ex-girlfriend's phone with requests to meet. This time, he invited her to walk at the Lon Hagler Reservoir, and by the end of their conversation, he was firmly convinced that everything was the same between them. No matter how much Ashley tried to convince her boyfriend that they weren't a couple anymore, it seemed like Tanner wasn't hearing her. Perhaps the problem was that Ashley wanted to break up peacefully. She didn't want Tanner to harbor resentment toward her, so the young man perceived this as girlish whim. Tanner continued flooding Ashley with messages on messenger apps and social networks, again persuading her to meet and talk. The girl repeatedly responded that she didn't want to see him anymore, but the boy wouldn't calm down. He invented false stories about his car breaking down and asked her to pick him up, but Ashley ignored them. On June 8th, Tanner invented another lie and managed to see Ashley. The girl didn't want to argue again, so she once more repeated to the young man that they had split up and he shouldn't seek further meetings. However, Tanner simply refused to accept this. Tanner snatched the phone from Ashley's hands and started reviewing her messages. He saw that she was chatting with two guys and created a huge scene as he deemed the messages overly flirtatious. He essentially accused her of cheating, and the meeting ended in another relationship dispute. That night, the offended boyfriend contacted these two guys and said numerous nasty things to them, which again infuriated Ashley. The girl had to explain herself to him once more, and probably for the 10th time, tell him that they weren't a couple anymore. In response to this, she received a message filled with bitter jealousy. Tanner wrote that he had spent lots of time and money on her. She had been making eyes at other guys behind his back. He reproached her for infidelity and warned that he was going to do something foolish. If previously Ashley wanted to remain friends with him, she now realized this was impossible due to Tanner's immaturity in every respect. The girl just didn't consider one thing. The guy wasn't merely immature, he was harboring a plan of revenge in his head for her daring to leave him. On June 8, 2016, Flores messaged Ashley again and asked for one final meeting. The girl explained she had plans for that day, but he kept insisting. Ashley's mistake was that she felt sorry for her ex-boyfriend and ultimately agreed to talk. Not wanting to appear rude or impolite, she failed to establish clear boundaries. She felt bad that Tanner couldn't accept their breakup and decided to try once more to convince him that this would be better for them both. Ashley didn't want to meet, but felt obligated to resolve this matter peacefully. And she shouldn't be judged for this in any way, because she was still too young to foresee how this meeting would end. So, on June 9th, the former sweethearts arranged to meet at Lon Hagler Reservoir to discuss their separation one last time. Ashley got into her truck and drove away. This was the last time she was seen alive. Ashley's mother expected her daughter to return home by 7:30 in the evening. When this didn't happen, her Her parents went to the reservoir and found her vehicle in the parking lot. The girl herself wasn't inside. Mother and father knew that if Ashley had planned to stay out late, she would have sent them a message or called. Moreover, they were aware that their daughter was supposed to meet with Tanner that evening. The worried parents immediately called the Larimer County Sheriff's Office and reported Ashley missing. Local law enforcement promptly began investigating and started calling Ashley's friends and relatives, trying to gather any possible information. And one thing stood out above everything else. Almost everyone interviewed mentioned Tanner's name. Naturally, it didn't take investigators long to discover that Tanner was Ashley's ex-boyfriend, whom she had recently broken up with, and that he was extremely upset about the breakup. One person revealed that Tanner had posted some message on Snapchat that made everyone think he wanted to end his life. Other people noticed they had never seen him as depressed as in recent days. But the most disturbing information about Tanner came from his father. The man informed police that his .22 caliber revolver was missing from the locked gun safe, and only his son knew where the key to the safe was located. The parents hadn't seen the teenager since 3:30 in the afternoon. They had called him, but the boy wasn't answering. So now the search efforts quickly shifted from one missing teenager to two, and it was necessary to find them as soon as possible. Tanner's vehicle, a white 1999 pickup truck with Colorado plates, was reported missing. Police across the state were alerted about the missing young people, and the investigation gained momentum. The search was in full force, but by 8 the next morning, everything was over. The sheriff's office received a call that Tanner's truck had been spotted on his deceased grandfather's property, located in Colebran, literally 5 hours' drive away on the other side of the state. Tanner's grandmother, who lived nearby, called a neighbor and asked if she had seen her grandson's truck. As soon as the neighbor confirmed that Tanner's vehicle was still on the property, the grandmother immediately reported this to law enforcement. Since it would take time to assemble a team and make an arrest to prevent the boy from escaping, they sent a wildlife ranger to the property that belonged to his late grandfather. He was supposed to monitor the truck and watch Tanner's actions. The ranger hid on the neighbor's property, and together they observed the young man doing something very suspicious. First, the youth threw blood-soaked rags right into the field. Then he tossed a rolled-up carpet into a woodpile behind the house. After that, Tanner pulled a blanket from the house and placed it on the back seat of his truck. The bundle appeared heavy, as if something was wrapped inside. And indeed, when the boy walked away from the vehicle, the observers saw a human hand protruding from the blanket. Fortunately, the county deputy sheriff and several police officers soon arrived on scene. Tanner didn't have time to drive away and escape. The arrest was made without incident. He was caught and taken into custody as he was leaving the house and heading toward the vehicle. On the truck's back seat, wrapped in a blanket, lay Ashley Doolittle. Unfortunately, no life-saving measures were needed because the girl was dead, caused by 3 gunshot wounds to the head. At first, Tanner tried to deny any involvement in the girl's death. He explained to officers that while they were sitting in his car discussing their relationship, Ashley grabbed the gun and pointed it at her head. The young man allegedly tried to take the gun away from her, but during the struggle, the weapon discharged. The bullet hit his girlfriend's head but didn't take her life. The girl screamed in pain, and Tanner, to end her suffering, shot her 2 more times. Obviously, this was a completely ridiculous, utterly absurd story that Tanner was trying to tell the authorities. He clearly wanted to make everything appear as an accident. However, he couldn't explain why he needed to shoot Ashley 2 more times. When officers directly told the boy that his entire story was nonsense and nobody would believe it, it took Tanner just a few minutes to tell the truth. That morning, Tanner took his father's gun to check if it worked properly. He went to Carter Lake to do some shooting. Then, at the appointed time, the young man met Ashley at Lon Hagler Reservoir. They left her vehicle and drove in Tanner's car to the lake where he had been the day before. According to Tanner, when the topic of breaking up came up, Ashley explained her desire by saying she wanted to date other guys before eventually marrying Tanner. That's how she supposedly motivated her wish to separate. Unfortunately, it was impossible to confirm his words. Who knows what Ashley might have said to her ex-boyfriend to soften the pain of separation. Nevertheless, after the conversation, Tanner turned the truck around and drove back. Judging by what happened next, the conversation went in the wrong direction. Ashley looked at Tanner and turned away. This glance somehow enraged him. He simply grabbed the gun and shot the girl. She started convulsing and panicking, so he shot again. The boy thought everything would happen instantly, but Ashley continued screaming. Then he fired a third time to put an end to her pain and suffering. Tanner confessed that he was frightened by the sight of bloodied Ashley. He couldn't look at her blood-covered face and decided to clean up the body. From Larimer County, he traveled almost to the other end of the state to his late grandfather's ranch. On June 17th, Ashley's funeral was held. No one could believe she was no longer in this world. Over 700 people gathered at the Catholic parish in Loveland, Colorado, to mourn the young girl's death. The number of people who came to bid farewell to Ashley was a vivid testament to the impact she had made on her community. Everyone was stunned and devastated by a tragedy that could have been prevented. The girl, who had achieved so much in her 18 years, unlike most peers, firmly knew what her future would be. Ashley knew what she wanted and was determined to achieve it. She knew her purpose and was already taking steps to reach it. The only thing Ashley didn't account for was that she would encounter someone who would decide to destroy all her aspirations. On June 20th, Tanner Flores first appeared in court, where he was charged with kidnapping and taking Ashley Doolittle's life. It was believed that the boy didn't allow the girl to leave his car that day when she wanted to leave. In October 2017, 6 months after Ashley's death, Tanner's trial began. The courtroom was completely packed with friends and relatives of both teenagers. It was a very emotional event for everyone. In reality, there was no doubt that Tanner had taken Ashley's life. The question was different, whether he did it deliberately or if his actions were the result of a spontaneous decision. According to the prosecution, Tanner went to Carter Lake in the morning to check the weapon, ensure it worked, and practice shooting. They also believed he had previously scouted for a suitable location for the attack, where there would be no witnesses. Additionally, the young man shot the girl with a single-action revolver. This meant that between each shot, he had to cock the firing mechanism. Consequently, Tanner had time to consider his further actions. The prosecutors also stated that Ashley might have survived the first shot if Tanner had sought help. Instead, he shot her 2 more times and drove 300 miles to hide the body. Of course, the defense insisted otherwise. In their opinion, unintentional killing would have been a fair charge for Tanner. Tanner himself completely denied planning to shoot Ashley, claiming everything happened spontaneously. He testified and described all the horrifying details of what happened that day. The young man stated that he threw both their phones out of the truck window, but before that, he sent himself a message from Ashley's phone, supposedly canceling their scheduled meeting. This clearly appeared as a failed attempt to cover his tracks. After the crime, Tanner took the girl's body to his late grandfather's estate, broke the sliding door's glass to access the house, washed away the blood, and watched several cartoons on TV to relax. He fell asleep without noticing, which was frightening given the teenager's lack of basic human emotions like sympathy and empathy. Tanner had just taken the life of an innocent girl whom he loved and didn't want to share with anyone, and after committing such a repulsive act, he turned on cartoons and peacefully fell asleep. The jury agreed with the prosecution's arguments, and on October 4, 2017, Tanner Flores was found guilty of intentional killing and kidnapping of Ashley Doolittle. The young man was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The girl's parents created a charitable foundation in her honor to raise awareness and prevent violence among teenagers, teaching them how to properly end relationships without risking their lives. Maury and Jeff Doolittle didn't want other parents to go through what they had experienced. In 2017, Ashley was posthumously named Boulder County Rodeo Queen. In her brief 18 years, she did more for society than some people do in their entire lifetime. Ashley Doolittle's dream came true, even if it was after her departure. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon. Is death ever random, or is the time allotted to each person on this earth predetermined somewhere? There's no definitive answer to this question, as there are varying perspectives on the subject. Today, we'll travel back nearly half a century to early 1976 to Leal, a village situated in DuPage County, Illinois. This is where 16-year-old Pamela Maurer lived with her family. The girl was born on October 24, 1959, and was one of 4 children of Louis and Elizabeth Maurer. Along with Pam, her parents raised 2 sons, Charles and Patrick, and another daughter, Susan. The Maurer children enjoyed quite a happy childhood. The siblings went hiking together, canoed, and organized athletic competitions. Pam was a cheerful giggler. That's how her relatives and close friends knew her. However, in unfamiliar company, the girl was quiet and shy. Her father, Louis, mentioned that she was an introvert and mostly kept to herself. But once you got to know her better, a completely different person emerged, fun-loving, sociable, and witty. Pam only felt at ease around her friends, and she simply tried to avoid other people. From early childhood, she was a trouble-free, very well-mannered child. Pam even bypassed the rebellious teenage phase when students become absolutely unmanageable. She didn't quarrel with her parents or seek out trouble. By the time this incident occurred, Pam was a student at Downers Grove South High School in Illinois. She was a typical teenage girl. She enjoyed doing everything that her peers did, hanging out, having fun, watching television, spending enjoyable time with friends. This is exactly how Pam spent her time when she wasn't studying. On Monday evening, January 12, 1976, Pamela Maurer and a couple of her girlfriends were hanging out at one of the houses in Leal, DuPage County. This was a common occurrence. The girls would gather at someone's place, style each other's hair, chat about trivial matters, and discuss boys. Everything was proceeding as usual. Pam was having a good time, laughing and enjoying herself. Around 9:45, she told her friends she wanted to go buy a soda at either the local McDonald's or the self-service laundromat, which had a small shop inside. Both establishments were located near her friend's house, practically across the street. It would have taken Pam only 10 to 15 minutes to get there and back. At 9:45 p.m., Pamela Maurer threw on her jacket, stepped outside, and headed out for a lemonade. However, she never returned again. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. In reality, when Pam hadn't shown up at her friend's house after 15 minutes or even half an hour, the girls didn't even entertain the thought that something might have happened to her. They simply assumed that Pam hadn't gone for soda, but headed home instead, since there was a 10 p.m. curfew, by which time she needed to be home. In 1976, there were no mobile phones, and the girl wouldn't have been able to notify her friends that she was heading home anyway. She couldn't message them through a messenger app or send a text message, as people didn't have various gadgets back then. Pam's parents, Louis and Elizabeth, also weren't initially worried when the clock struck 10 and their daughter hadn't arrived home yet. Pam had always been an obedient child, so if she was running somewhat late somewhere, there must have been substantial reasons. Although this was very unlike her, because the girl knew her mom and dad would worry about her. Concern emerged when an hour passed, and Pamela still hadn't come home. Around 11 p.m., the girl's mother, Elizabeth, called her friend's landline phone, where Pam had been that evening, and asked to speak with her daughter. However, the girl explained that Pam wasn't with them. She had gone out for a soda and then was presumably supposed to head home. At that moment, alarm bells started ringing at full volume. If the schoolgirl wasn't with her friends and hadn't returned home, where could she be at such a late hour? The girl's parents, her brothers and sister, as well as Pam's friends, immediately began searching. They drove through the streets, checked the local McDonald's and the self-service laundromat looking for her. But time was relentlessly approaching midnight, so all the stores were already closed. The search continued, but Pamela was nowhere to be seen. Elizabeth returned home and dialed the police department to report her 16-year-old daughter missing. Despite Pam being a high school student, she was technically considered a child. Apparently, the police didn't take this report very seriously at first. Sometimes teenagers can be defiant and disobedient, going out after curfew. Pam was exactly at that age when such behavior was considered almost normal, so the officers didn't suspect anything sinister had happened to the girl. They advised the parents to simply wait. Surely the schoolgirl had met some friend and gotten caught up in conversation. They did send patrol cars out to inspect the neighborhood again for any signs of Pamela, but this was done more as a formality. The police car also drove through the streets where her parents and friends had recently been searching for the girl, so it wasn't surprising that they didn't find anyone. With each hour that passed without news, Lewis and Elizabeth grew increasingly worried. Then the worry transformed into panic. They were simply going crazy, imagining their girl somewhere alone in the darkness and cold. Maybe she was injured or hurt and couldn't walk. Nobody in the Maurer house went to sleep that night. The weather conditions made everything worse. It was January, and DuPage County was buried in snow. Additionally, it was winter cold outside. The missing girl's parents desperately needed answers, and it wasn't long before they received them. Unfortunately, these were the horrible news that no parent would ever want to hear. The very next day after Pamela Maurer's disappearance, on the morning of January 13, 1976, a member of the public driving to work on the highway noticed something on the road. At that moment, he was on College Road, just a couple of miles from the village of Leal. The driver decided to stop his car and take a closer look at what object was lying in the snow. When the man stepped out of his vehicle, his gaze happened to shift to the shoulder of the road, where beyond the guardrail he spotted the body of a young girl lying on the ground. She was dead. The driver hurried to the nearest telephone and called the police. Identifying the deceased wasn't difficult. The item that caught the driver's attention on the road was a school ID card, and it bore the name of Pamela Maurer, the 16-year-old girl who hadn't returned home the previous night. It was Pam. She was lying dead on the roadside, face down. The girl was fully dressed, missing only one shoe. When police arrived at the scene, they immediately noticed that rigor mortis had set in. This indicated that the girl had been lying there for several hours, possibly all night. Initially, detectives assumed that Pam's death was the result of some tragic accident. For instance, she might have been hit by a car. Because of this, they failed to properly secure the crime scene. They allowed all possible tracks in the snow near the body to be trampled, thus practically destroying potential evidence. Of course, this wasn't an accident, as the girl simply couldn't have ended up at night on the roadside several miles from home. Later, during the autopsy, it was concluded that Pam had been the victim of an attack. It was determined that the cause of her death was strangulation. Detectives believed she was asphyxiated with a rubber hose found in the snow near the body. Marks and bruises on her neck supported this theory. Such rubber hoses could be purchased at any hardware store and at some gas stations, so it was unlikely that police would be able to track down the person who purchased the hose. The coroner also established the approximate time of death, between 10 and 12 o'clock at night. It appeared that Pam was attacked shortly after she left her friend's house for soda at 9:45 p.m. The girl was abducted while walking alone, subjected to forced sexual contact, and then strangled. Afterward, her lifeless body was dumped on the roadside in the snow, like some piece of trash. The investigation into the crime committed against 16-year-old Pamela Maurer began. However, from the start, police knew that solving this case would be difficult for several reasons. First, due to incorrect assumptions about an accidental death by vehicle, the crime scene was simply trampled, thereby destroying possible traces of the perpetrator. Second, this was 1976, a time when forensic examination and comparative DNA analysis were still at a very rudimentary level. The police didn't yet have the necessary means to identify criminals through databases. The police collected all genetic material found on the victim's body and attempted to preserve it before DNA analysis technology became available. Despite the difficulties, the investigation began, and detectives started checking all men present in Pam's life. One of the first people who could fall under suspicion was the girl's boyfriend. The young man was called in for questioning at the police station and asked to explain what he was doing that evening when Pamela disappeared. According to the youth, he had been at home with his mother all evening. The day before, he had gotten into serious trouble, and his mother had placed him under house arrest, forbidding him from going outside at all. This was, of course, an alibi, and his mother confirmed it. But detectives couldn't clear the boy of suspicion based solely on his mother's words. After all, the woman might have lied to protect her own son. The police were very skeptical of Pam's boyfriend. He apparently sensed this, and during questioning demanded a lawyer. The youth refused to cooperate and answer additional investigator questions until he was provided with legal counsel. By doing so, the boy only intensified suspicion toward himself. Eventually, they backed off from him since the teenager didn't have a car or access to one, and he couldn't have transported Pam's body to the outskirts and dumped it on the road. But he wasn't completely eliminated from the list of assault suspects. Police were certain that the perpetrator was behind the wheel that night. Perhaps the girl was abducted and placed in a car when she went out for lemonade. And after the abuse, the body was left in the snow on the shoulder of College Road. Detectives continued checking all of Pam's possible acquaintances, but one by one, these people were ruled out. Then investigators switched to local criminals, and also eliminated everyone who might have been involved in similar things. Additionally, police tracked down all leads coming from the public, because news of Pamela Maurer's death spread very quickly through nearby towns. Thus, detectives received information about a 19-year-old young man named Michael Basso. Someone overheard his conversation in a bar when he was quite drunk. Michael was bragging that he was the one who took Pam Maurer's life. Adding to the suspicions was the fact that Michael Basso was already known to police. The guy at his age had quite a long criminal history. Moreover, he worked at a gas station located literally steps away from the self-service laundromat, and could easily have obtained the rubber hose that ultimately became the murder weapon. All circumstances pointed against Michael Basso, but in reality, the evidence against him was circumstantial. The police had nothing concrete linking the guy to the crime. Michael was brought to the police station and questioned. It turned out he didn't remember anything he'd said in his drunken haze. As it happened, Michael didn't even know the deceased girl and had just blurted out nonsense at the bar to appear intimidating to his acquaintances. They put him on a lie detector, but the test results were deemed inconclusive, meaning Michael neither failed nor passed the test, and after questioning, he was released since there was nothing to charge him with. Unfortunately, as time passed, the flow of calls and tips from the public notably dwindled. Detectives checked all possible leads, but achieved absolutely no results. The case of Pamela Maurer's death began to fade until it was placed on the shelf with unsolved crimes. This was, of course, devastating news for the girl's family. They had to bury their daughter while the person who took her life walked freely. The case remained unsolved for a very long time. Several years passed, then decades, before it was revisited again. In 2001, The Maurer family was marking the tragic 25-year anniversary of Pamela's death. A quarter-century had passed when the DuPage County Police Department decided to re-examine the previously unsolved case. In 25 years, enormous changes had occurred in forensic science, and now investigators hoped to determine the perpetrator's identity using the latest advances in comparative DNA analysis. To finally identify the killer, all evidence collected in Pamela Maurer's case was retrieved from police archives and sent for re-examination. Traces of the attacker's seminal fluid were found on the deceased girl's clothing, and they were able to extract a DNA profile. Detectives were already anticipating a swift conclusion to this story. The DNA profile of the suspected perpetrator was entered into the National CODIS database. Unfortunately, their hopes proved futile, as no matches were found. The DNA was also compared with Michael Basso's DNA, who by that time had died in a car accident in the early 2000s, and it was proven that this person had no connection to Pamela's murder. The Maurer family's barely kindled hope was extinguished again. The case hit another dead end, and it likely would have remained gathering dust in the archives if not for the involvement of a detective named Chris Loudon. This man served as an investigator in the Lisle Police Department, was Pam's peer, and felt a personal connection to her violent death. The story of the 16-year-old girl left a deep mark in his heart, as he was the same teenager at the time, and all this could have happened to one of his classmates or even to himself. Chris often imagined how Pam's life would have turned out if she had remained alive. Every significant event in his life, school graduation, first love, first breakup, marriage, having children, somehow brought his thoughts back to his deceased peer. It angered him that someone so casually disposed of another's future, taking away all possibilities in one winter evening. This anger led Detective Chris Loudon to decide to participate in the investigation of Pamela Maurer's case, along with other detectives. He began working on it in March 2019. By that time, more than 43 years had passed since Pam's death. The new team decided to turn to a method called DNA phenotyping. This method involved taking a DNA sample and using it to predict what the owner looked like. The knowledge was based on genetic information and DNA sequencing. Phenotyping provided insight into the possible eye color of the owner, skin tone, face shape, hair color, ancestry, and similar things. With this information, they could create a composite image of a person's appearance and identify approximate similarities with the unknown subject. Detective Chris and the rest of the team, having nothing else to go on, decided to try this method. They contacted a laboratory that specialized in DNA phenotyping, and with their help created an image of the suspected perpetrator at approximately age 25. Clearly, today this person was significantly older, but one thing was discovered that particularly struck the scientists conducting the tests. They were able to tell detectives that the person responsible for Pamela Maurer's death most likely had green eyes. Many people think their eyes are green, but in reality only 2% of Earth's population has truly green eyes. The rest have only a similar shade. So this information was promising for the police. This fact alone significantly helped narrow down the circle of suspects, but these weren't all the discoveries that emerged from DNA phenotyping. Specialists at the nanolaboratory utilized the perpetrator's DNA profile to attempt to locate his potential relatives. Through genetic genealogy, they uploaded the profile to a website and constructed his family tree. While critics consider this practice controversial, labeling it as a possible privacy invasion, the societal benefit of ensuring criminals end up behind bars and the fact that families receive some closure far outweigh these concerns. Thus, law enforcement obtained a genealogical record of the suspected rapist. Based on the records, the offender likely carried the surname Lindahl. Detectives promptly investigated information about all men with this surname who resided in the DuPage County area at the time of Pam's death. They managed to narrow down the suspects to two brothers, one of whom had green eyes. This person was named Bruce Lindell. When detectives looked at an old photograph of Bruce Lindell in his youth, they noticed a clear resemblance to the composite sketch created from the DNA profile. So who was Bruce Lindell? Bruce Everett Lindell was born January 29, 1953, in a Chicago suburb called St. Charles in DuPage County, Illinois, to Jerome and Arlene Lindell. He was one of 4 children in the family. Bruce attended the same high school that Pam would later attend. When the young woman died, he was approximately 23 years old. After high school, he enrolled in college to study electromechanical engineering. Over the next several years, Bruce worked in his field and served as a vocational instructor at a technical school. In his spare time, Bruce was passionate about skydiving and racquetball. Most of his friends and acquaintances spoke extremely well of him, though many also regarded him as peculiar. Bruce easily descended into states of anger and occasionally displayed aggression toward others. Girls at school were frankly afraid of him due to his explosive temperament. One time, a girl named Terry Cooper, who attended the same school as Bruce Lindell, left the bowling alley and was about to get into her car. At that moment, Bruce appeared beside her and began persistently offering to drive her home. When Terry tried to start her vehicle, the engine wouldn't work. The girl repeatedly turned the key in the ignition while Bruce stood by the open window, continuing to insist that Terry get into his car. Eventually, Terry Cooper's car started. Bruce seemed to transform in that instant. He suddenly became enraged and started cursing, shouting that the car wasn't supposed to start. The girl got the impression that Bruce had deliberately tampered with the engine and was now furious that his scheme had failed. Terry drove away, and a couple of years later learned that Bruce had repeatedly forced girls into his vehicle, driven them to secluded locations, and molested them. Terry's brother once witnessed such an incident. A schoolgirl, seized by Bruce, attempted to resist and screamed for help. Terry's brother intervened, preventing Bruce from forcing another girl into the car. This led to such a serious fight between the young men that Terry's brother required 11 stitches on his face. Since Bruce had quite an extensive criminal record by age 20, he was arrested several times for minor offenses, though he managed to get away with small fines. Bruce Lindell's former girlfriend, Sherry Hobson, described her ex-partner's strange behavior. She dated Bruce in the 1970s and had no inkling of his criminal tendencies. Only with time did she begin to notice alarming signs. Bruce, according to her, was highly volatile and aggressive, particularly when she refused to comply with his requests. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. One day, Sherry discovered a woman's earring in his car. Bruce claimed it belonged to his sister, then simply tossed it out the window. The girl also suspected her boyfriend was mixing pills into her drinks and food because she would fall asleep during intercourse and couldn't remember what had happened to her. Sherry would wake up covered in bruises and couldn't rationally explain how they appeared. Only later, learning the horrifying details about the man she had dated, could Sherry draw conclusions and explain the reasons for many of his actions. She thanked fate for surviving her involvement with a monster like Bruce. In December 1976, Bruce was arrested for marijuana possession, but he was never addicted to more serious substances. However, in March 1979, Bruce brought a 20-year-old girl named Annette Laser to his home, promising to sell her some marijuana. As soon as the door closed behind Annette, she discovered this was nothing more than a pretext. The man's intention was altogether different. At gunpoint, he forced Annette to undress, after which he subjected her to forced intercourse. Afterward, somehow Annette managed to escape and contact the police. However, according to reports, no charges were filed. Annette struggled with addiction, and the officers simply didn't believe her. There's also information that the apartment where everything occurred belonged to a police officer who didn't want his name mentioned in connection with illegal activities. The attacks continued after this. Once Bruce was stopped by police officers who discovered an unconscious woman next to him in his car, blood seeping from her head. When law enforcement officials questioned him, Bruce responded that he was taking the victim to the hospital, though he was actually driving in the opposite direction from the hospital. Eventually, the woman was transported to the clinic by ambulance. It was revealed that she had become an assault victim. After drinking a cocktail Bruce offered at a party, the victim couldn't remember anything. And again, Bruce faced no charges, despite specific evidence of his guilt. Unsurprisingly, he experienced a sense of impunity and continued attacking women. Bruce was a very aggressive person who couldn't accept no for an answer. More and more women endured unfortunate experiences after encountering Bruce Lingle. But the attacks led nowhere. The man faced no charges. During this period, he constantly changed residences until finally settling in Aurora. In June 1980, another attack occurred. 25-year-old Deborah Calendrier was in a shopping center parking lot in Aurora, Illinois. She was securing her bicycle to a metal railing. Then, a stranger approached her with a request. This stranger was, of course, Bruce Lingle. Bruce told Deborah that he was having car trouble. He needed someone to sit in the driver's seat and turn the ignition while he worked on the engine under the hood. Deborah agreed to help without any suspicion. She approached the stranger's car, settled into the driver's seat, and prepared to start the engine. But at that moment, the door on her side opened, and Bruce, threatening Deborah, forced her into the passenger seat, locked the door, and pressed the gas pedal. Thus, the man abducted the frightened girl right from the parking lot in broad daylight and took her to his home. Putting a belt around Deborah's neck like a dog collar, Bruce dragged her into his house, where he subjected her to forced intercourse. By some miracle, while Bruce slept, Deborah managed to escape from the house and flee. She immediately went to the police to report the kidnapping and assault. Bruce was arrested and this time charged, but he was immediately released on bail. His court date was set for early 1981, but the judicial hearing never took place. All charges against Bruce were dropped, and he was free again. This was because in October 1980, 4 months after the attack on Deborah Calendrier, the girl disappeared in the most mysterious way. She left work as usual and vanished. No one had the slightest idea what happened. Since Deborah went missing, the case against Bruce Lingle was dismissed due to the absence of the key witness and plaintiff. Thus, a dangerous predator could freely roam the streets and scout for his next victim. In December 1980, Bruce attempted to force himself on a 30-year-old woman. After she refused, he attacked and began beating her. Since people were nearby, Bruce hastily retreated without causing significant harm to the victim's health. The injured woman went to the police. Because she hadn't gotten a good look at her attacker, she pointed to a photo of another person at the police station who somewhat resembled Bruce. The mistake was discovered only after some time. In January 1981, Bruce was caught red-handed while monitoring and recording others' phone conversations for blackmail purposes. When police tried to arrest him, he pointed a rifle at one of the officers. As a result, he was additionally charged with resisting arrest, illegal weapon possession, and assault. But then, he was released on bail again. And while the investigation proceeded, Bruce remained free. Meanwhile, the mystery of Deborah Calendrier's disappearance remained unsolved for a long time. Only 2 years after her disappearance, in 1982, were her remains discovered. A farmer from a neighboring town found them in a shallow grave in a field. The cause of death couldn't be determined since Deborah's body had severely decomposed. Given that the remains were found buried in a vacant lot, police concluded that the girl had been a victim of crime. One didn't need to be a genius to identify the person responsible for Deborah Calendrier's death. It was likely Bruce Lingle. It was too convenient and timely that Deborah went missing shortly before Bruce was due to appear in court for her kidnapping and assault. So detectives suspected that he took the girl's life to prevent her from testifying against him. He could have committed the crime himself or hired a hitman. Soon after Deborah's body was discovered, a man came to the Aurora police station claiming that Bruce had offered him a large sum of money to dispose of Deborah and then get rid of her body. So, regardless of whether Bruce physically committed the crime or found someone to execute it, this person was clearly responsible for her death. However, even after this, Bruce faced no charges in the girl's death. Police incompetence or corruption had nothing to do with it. The reason Bruce got away with another crime was simple. When Deborah Calendrier's remains were discovered in 1982, he was dead. Bruce Lindell died in April 1981 at age 28. The circumstances of his death were incredibly ironic. He accidentally killed himself while attempting to take another person's life. It was April 4th, 1981. That day, Bruce was driving his car around Naperville, Illinois. While at a shopping center, he met an 18-year-old young man named Charles Robert Huber Jr., whom everyone called Chuck. The young men got to talking and decided to play bowling together, after which they wanted to continue their acquaintance and go somewhere. Chuck agreed. That same evening, the young men showed up at Bruce's girlfriend's apartment, and apparently some kind of argument broke out between them. Bruce grabbed a knife, attacked Chuck, and began inflicting knife wounds. In total, he stabbed the young man 28 times. Chuck died from his injuries, but before that, he managed to fight back, and during the violent struggle, Bruce's hand slipped and he accidentally cut himself. The blade entered Bruce's thigh, damaging the femoral artery. The knife wound was so deep that the perpetrator lost a catastrophic amount of blood and died on the spot within minutes. Such is the irony of fate. Detectives who in 2019 took on the unsolved case of 16-year-old Pamela Maurer after DNA phenotyping and genetic genealogy methods identified Bruce Lindell as a possible suspect. Learning that this person had died, the officers experienced some disappointment. By that time, Bruce had been dead for 38 years. This meant he would never stand trial for the teenager's death. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon. Surely you've watched movies where the events seem crystal clear to your very core, but at the end of the plot, everything turns out to be exactly the opposite. The good guy turns out to be the villain, and the bad guy isn't as terrible as he appeared at the beginning. Sometimes truth proves to be stranger than fictional reality. This is the story of Parth Ingle. On the evening of January 3, 2008, in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, a 26-year-old man named Parth Ingle poured himself a beer and settled on the couch next to his girlfriend to watch television. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was already around 8 o'clock in the evening, and they weren't expecting any visitors. After exchanging puzzled glances with his girlfriend and shrugging his shoulders, Parth got up and went to answer. At the doorstep stood his mother, Bavnaben, holding a small gym bag. The woman lived with her husband in the town of Middletown, which was located about an hour-and-a-half drive from Pottstown. Nothing seemed unusual at first glance. His mother occasionally stayed overnight at her son's apartment, but she had never shown up without warning. Moreover, when Parth looked at his mom, he clearly noticed she had been crying. Her eyeliner was smeared, and her face appeared somewhat swollen. Without offering any explanation, she simply said she needed somewhere to spend the night. She entered the apartment and, quickly crossing the hallway, slipped into the guest bedroom, after which she closed the door and locked the bolt. Parth and his girlfriend looked at each other in confusion and simply continued what they were doing. 3 hours later, at 11 p.m., Parth was already in bed, but he couldn't fall asleep because he was worried about his mom. His bedroom was next to the guest room, and he could hear the woman walking around the room all night and quietly crying. She clearly had some problems. Parth had no idea what had happened, but deep down he knew it was most likely connected to his father, Parth Ingle. The thing was, his parents had a complicated relationship. They had immigrated from India several decades ago and settled in Pennsylvania, where they had 2 children, Parth and his sister. His father worked as an engineer at Boeing, while his mother owned a franchise of grocery stores. The parents had arrived in the United States with nothing, and through their own hard work achieved success and financial independence. Now they had quite a comfortable life. Mother and father had managed to overcome difficulties together, which meant they truly loved each other. The couple raised 2 children, got along wonderfully with each other, and were an excellent pair. Everything was wonderful until a couple of years ago when Arun Kumar started an affair, and his wife found out about it. The man assured Bhavna-ben that this fling meant nothing to him, and he would immediately end it. Parth's mother forgave her husband to preserve the family, but despite this, she knew deep down that she could never trust her spouse as before. The woman asked her son to help her set up surveillance on her husband. Using a computer program, she could view her husband's emails and all his internet activity. Parth felt uneasy about installing spyware on his father's computer. He felt like he was interfering in his parents' lives, but this was the only way at the moment to calm his mother so she could move forward. The woman wanted to preserve the family, but now she needed complete transparency in her relationship with her husband. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Parth lay in his bedroom analyzing the situation. Perhaps Mom had found something on Dad's computer, or Arun Kumar had started another affair, which upset his wife again. When Parth tried to fall asleep, a quiet voice came from the next room. The young man guessed that Mom was talking to someone on the phone. Since Parth couldn't sleep and was intrigued by what was happening, he decided to eavesdrop on the conversation. He quietly got up from his bed, approached the wall that separated their rooms, and pressed his ear against it. And what he heard was much worse than he could have imagined. The woman was telling someone on the phone that Arun Kumar had taken out 3 life insurance policies on Parth, his sister, and herself, with a total value of $6 million. She wasn't concerned about divorce now. She was more worried about the physical safety of the children and herself. Parth's mom, for some reason, had decided that her husband was planning to take their lives to collect this entire sum. Then the woman hung up and started pacing the room again. Parth, having heard this terrifying news, didn't know what to do. His father was indeed far from being a perfect spouse, but the thought that Arun Kumar wanted to harm his wife or his own children seemed completely impossible. Parth stood in the middle of the room contemplating what he had heard. He had indeed noticed changes in his father's behavior lately, but had attributed it all to stress. However, in light of the new information, these changes appeared sinister. Usually mild-mannered and calm, Arun Kumar had gotten into a fierce argument with his neighbor several weeks earlier about the property line between their houses. He seemed to be deliberately provoking the neighbor. And a few days later, one of the faucets in the bathroom stopped working. Father got out his tools and started taking apart the plumbing. Arun Kumar was an engineer, so this wouldn't have been difficult for him. But after disassembling the faucet and pipe into parts, he laid all the pieces on the floor, dropped his tools, and left. Given that Father had always been incredibly organized and even pedantic, the mess left behind puzzled the household. And now Parth decided to find out if his father really posed a threat to them. He silently left the bedroom, settled at the kitchen table, turned on his laptop, and loaded the program that was spying on his father's computer. The young man hoped to find some explanations that could show his mother was just dramatizing the situation or misinterpreting what she had learned. Parth couldn't accept the thought that his own father could take their lives for some insurance payout. However, after loading the spyware and viewing some recent activities, he realized that the situation with his father was actually much worse than his mom had imagined. Parth not only found all these multi-million-dollar insurance policies written for him, his sister, and their mom, but also discovered a bunch of forged documents. There were photographs of Arun Kumar, but they were attached to a passport application under a different name. Now, Parth was truly convinced that his father was preparing to take his family's lives, collect millions of dollars in insurance, and then, using the fake passport he was trying to obtain, flee the country. Parth's mom spent the next few days in the guest bedroom. She barely came out, and every time the young man tried to talk to her, she closed the door right in his face. Finally, Parth couldn't take it anymore and told his mother that he knew everything. They sat down and talked about everything they had learned through the spyware, and a joint decision was made to go to the police. The very next day, Parth went to the police station with all the available evidence that their lives were in danger. The guy was so nervous, his hands were shaking, but the detective who listened to his story said there was nothing he could do. There was nothing illegal about taking out life insurance policies for your family. And the officer also noted that Arun Kumar had insured his own life too, naming his wife and children as beneficiaries. As for the passport application with someone else's name, the police officer couldn't do anything about that either, since Arun Kumar hadn't officially submitted any documents. A filled-out application wasn't yet a violation of law. Having returned home empty-handed, Parth explained to his mother that they had no choice but to just sit and wait. They continued monitoring Arun Kumar's actions, hoping he would do something incriminating. But the man wasn't doing anything suspicious. He was just using his computer for work. Father also called Bhavnaben several times asking when she would return home, showing no concern that she had stayed at their son's apartment for so long. Meanwhile, Parth delved deeper into his father's computer, trying to find any evidence of his devious plan. Parth found email correspondence with people from India that vaguely indicated Arun Kumar was involved in some questionable deal, but the content of the letters was too ambiguous to understand exactly what was happening. And Parth wondered if he and his mom had been mistaken. Maybe the danger wasn't to them, but to his father. Perhaps these insurance policies and new identity were an attempt to protect the family from trouble. Parth's mom finally returned home, while the son continued monitoring his father's internet activity. Nothing was happening, and Parth was beginning to think that his mother had just worked herself up and everything was actually fine. His father had sorted out his problems, and danger no longer threatened. But on January 20th, 2008, about 2.5 weeks after Parth's mom returned home, everything changed. That morning, the young man, as usual, accessed his father's computer through the spyware and saw an email addressed to some unknown woman. Arun Kumar wrote that he had a major contract coming up and would soon make a lot of money. At the end of the letter, the man told this stranger that he loved her. Only then did Parth realize that his father had started a new affair. He didn't know who the letter was addressed to, but it definitely wasn't his mom. Additionally, while checking computer activity, he discovered a message from Arun Kumar saying that his father, Parth's grandfather, had died. The man was planning to go to the funeral alone since his wife and children weren't invited. The young man read this message in shock. He couldn't believe his grandfather had died, but he was even more shocked by the phrase that he, his sister, and mom weren't invited to the funeral. Maybe his father was planning to finish them off, and that's why he wrote that he would come alone, to avoid extra questions. Parth didn't know what was happening, but he felt that some conspiracy was being planned against him, his mom, and sister. He needed to act right now, before it was too late. He called his mother, and together they made a plan. That evening, around 9 o'clock, the young man got in his car and drove to his parents' house in Middletown to talk with his father. His mother was supposed to be safely at her son's apartment during this time. Parth wanted to tell his father directly that they knew about his plans. And although approaching the house, The guy felt his hands trembling. At the same time, he felt an intense surge of adrenaline. He had a significant advantage in this whole situation. Arun Kumar wasn't expecting his son's visit late in the evening and, consequently, wouldn't be able to prepare for the meeting beforehand. Also, Parth was significantly stronger than his father physically. He was over 180 centimeters tall and weighed more than 90 kilograms. Therefore, the young man was completely confident he would emerge victorious from this confrontation. At 11:45 p.m., Parth finally parked his car at his parents' house. He climbed the steps to the porch and knocked on the door. A couple of seconds later, Arun Kumar opened the door and was completely bewildered to see his son on the doorstep. Before the man could say or do anything, Parth, in the most serious and authoritative voice he could muster, stated that they needed to talk. Then he deliberately shoulder-bumped his father when entering inside. Stunned by the sudden night visit, the man remained standing by the door. Parth turned around and started telling his father everything that had built up. He offered him a choice: either stop everything and become a normal husband and father again, or go to prison right now for planning an attempt on his own family's life. Arun Kumar silently looked at his son and didn't respond. Then he suddenly rushed to his bedroom before Parth could react. When his father unexpectedly disappeared from view, Parth suddenly lost his composure. All his confidence in his own strength suddenly evaporated. He realized that Arun Kumar had rushed to the room for a weapon. Now Parth would have to enter the bedroom and stop his father. The young man looked inside and froze in hesitation. His father was just sitting on the bed, staring fixedly toward the bathroom. Parth followed his gaze and saw that Arun Kumar was looking at the broken sink and tools strewn across the floor. Everything had remained scattered since that time when he had tried to fix the faucet. There, among everything else, lay a heavy metal adjustable wrench. The next morning, Arun Kumar's wife stopped her car in front of the house she shared with her husband. She hesitantly climbed the steps, opened the front door, and called out, "Is anyone home?" Silence was her answer. The woman immediately had a bad feeling. She slowly walked down the hallway where Parth had confronted his father the previous evening. Then she looked into the bedroom and couldn't believe her eyes. There was blood everywhere, on the carpets, the walls, the ceiling, and furniture. And in the middle of the room lay a dead body, so mutilated and destroyed that she couldn't even identify it. After several seconds, the woman ran outside and dialed 911. It took the police almost 4 years to finally untangle Arun Kumar's insane web of lies and make an arrest for the crime that occurred inside that house. The reason why the investigation took almost 4 years was that everything was not as it seemed at first glance. Parth and his mother were right about many things regarding Arun Kumar. For example, the man did indeed have a mistress. He had taken out life insurance policies on his entire family and was actually planning to obtain fake documents. They were also right that Arun Kumar was involved in a questionable deal with people from India. But the details of this deal were not at all what his wife and son had assumed. And when Arun Kumar wrote in his message that he would come alone to his father's funeral in India without his spouse and children, it was indeed a cover, part of his plan. And the man's intentions really did include violence. But Arun Kumar's target wasn't at all what Parth and his mom thought. Their lives weren't at the center of the scheme at all. Father was planning to take his own life. More precisely, he was planning to pretend to commit suicide. And that was the questionable deal. He had contacted people in India who could help him stage his own death. Arun Kumar was planning to go to India, fake his death, and wait until he was officially declared dead. This would have resulted in his family receiving the insurance payout from his own life insurance policy. The money would have gone to his wife and children, and Arun Kumar himself would have been able to disappear, using a fake identity, and go somewhere far away with his mistress, the woman to whom he had written in the email about the big money payout. But neither Parth nor his mother knew about this last important part of Arunkumar's plan. They truly believed they had become the target of a grand conspiracy and that they were going to be sent to the afterlife. Therefore, they decided to act first. On January 20th, 2008, Parth and his mother Bhavnaben devised an alibi. They were going to tell everyone that around 8 o'clock in the evening, the son had picked up his mother from the family home and they had returned together to his apartment. But in reality, the young man hadn't picked up his mother. She remained in the house when at 11:45 p.m. Parth arrived to talk with his father. The woman could hear perfectly well from the far room as her son poured out all his grievances and resentments onto his father. How he told about being aware of Arunkumar's sinister plans. At some point during this tense argument in the hallway, the man turned and ran to the bedroom, with the son rushing after him. Standing in the doorway of the room, the young man noticed that his father, sitting on the bed, was looking at the adjustable wrench lying on the bathroom floor. Parth thought that Arunkumar was about to grab the wrench and attack him, so the young man decided to act first. He grabbed the heavy metal tool and started striking, beating the man to death. Afterward, Parth left his father's unrecognizably mutilated body in a pool of blood in the middle of the bedroom, and he and his mother left the house and returned to the apartment. The next morning, the woman again went to her house and pretended to discover Arunkumar's mangled body, although she already knew what awaited her there. She called 911 and, when the police arrived, acted like a widow crushed by her husband's sudden death, crying and lamenting. The medical examiner determined that Arunkumar Ingle's death resulted from blunt force trauma to the head and multiple stab wounds to the head and neck. The man's genitals were also severely damaged from the blows. But almost 4 years later, when the truth about this horrible situation finally surfaced, Parth Ingle and his mother Bhavnaben were arrested. They unanimously claimed that they sincerely believed their lives were in danger. They claimed Arunkumar had threatened his son during that confrontation in the house, and Parth had acted only in self-defense. Later, the young man who had taken his own father's life slightly modified his testimony and said that he had taken the adjustable wrench and knife from his father, not found them in the bathroom. 55-year-old Arunkumar Ingle was just days away from executing his plan, staging his death in India, then returning to the United States with fake documents to live with his mistress. According to the police report, in the event of his death, his children and wife would have received $3.5 million in life insurance. At the time of the crime, Parth had substantial debts: $29,000 for a car, $8,000 for a motorcycle, and $5,900 in credit card debt. During the investigation, prosecutors charged Parth with illegally hacking his father's email and installing a hidden GPS device in Arunkumar's car. The main motive for the crime was considered to be that the son didn't want his father to abandon the family and leave for his mistress. Ultimately, Parth Ingle pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 33 months in prison. His mother, 53-year-old Bhavnaben Ingle, also admitted her involvement in the conspiracy and received a punishment of 10 months imprisonment. Sometimes truth proves to be stranger than fictional reality. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon. Some women, having lost their husbands and being left with children in their care, discover very questionable ways to stay afloat. This is exactly what Alex did when she was offered a substantial sum for a small favor. The mother simply dreamed of giving her sons a better life, but the outcome turned out to be sorrowful. Alex drove her boys to her parents and settled alone in front of her computer. Tomorrow would be a challenging day, after which she would either solve all her financial troubles or vanish forever. The woman wasn't entirely sure how everything would unfold, but her intuition suggested that this venture might prove dangerous. Alex had thought through possible outcomes beforehand, so she wrote a note to her son. She was confident that her boy would figure out how to proceed. This shocking incident occurred just a couple of years ago, in late 2021 in Hastings. This district is situated in East Sussex County in southeastern England. Alexandra Morgan, age 34, lived approximately 30-plus miles from East Sussex in a town called Cranbrook in Kent County, with a population just over 6,500 people. She was a single mother raising 2 sons. Alexandra, or Alex as her close ones called her, was a qualified dog groomer. She enjoyed her work. Unfortunately, it didn't provide the financial opportunities that were so essential for the woman. Caring for 2 young boys consumed much energy and time. Supporting the family and looking after the children rested entirely on the woman's shoulders. She had no one to rely on except herself. All week, Alex worked tirelessly, so on November 13th, 2021, she took her children to her parents' house for them to stay with their grandparents for a couple of days. The woman told her mother and father that she planned to go to a spa for the weekend, relax, and get some rest. The next day, November 14th, Alex left home, got into her car, and headed to the spa center. She promised her parents she would pick up the boys on November 17th. However, when November 17th arrived, Alex didn't show up at the family home or call her mother to inform that she would be delayed. The parents didn't raise alarm, deciding to wait until the next day when their daughter didn't appear on November 18th and gave no sign of herself. Alex's mom contacted the police and reported her daughter's disappearance. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. The investigation into Alexandra Morgan's disappearance began almost immediately. The police's first actions were to visit Alex's house in Cranbrook to find any possible clues about what might have happened to her. Naturally, the woman wasn't at home. The dwelling itself appeared quite ordinary, with no signs of struggle, forced entry, break-in, or anything similar, and consequently, no leads. All the police knew at that point from Alex's parents' statements was that the missing woman was planning to go to a spa center that weekend, located in York, several hours' drive from Kent, so police tried to track Alex's movements and her vehicle using surveillance cameras and automatic license plate recognition cameras. On the morning of November 14th, shortly after Alex left home, she was captured by surveillance camera at a gas station in Cranbrook, located nearby. Around 7:30 a.m., the woman stepped out of her white Mini Cooper, filled her car with gas, and exchanged a few words with the clerk, also telling him she was heading to a spa center in York. However, after leaving the gas station, Alex headed south, although York was north of Kent. For some reason, she drove in the opposite direction. Why did she lie about her spa trip? Where was this woman actually heading? To answer all these questions, police continued attempting to track Alexandra Morgan's movements that morning through road cameras. But the problem was that the woman seemed to choose back roads where cameras weren't as frequent. During the investigation, police examined Alex's phone records and, based on this, determined that her mobile phone had pinged towers in Hastings in East Sussex, after which it suddenly turned off. It appeared East Sussex was the last known location where Morgan had made contact. The reason why the woman concealed her final destination from everyone still remained unclear. Therefore, police began checking surveillance cameras in the Hastings area. They were looking for any footage where the white Mini Cooper might have been recorded. Eventually, police noticed how Alex's car approached a scrap metal yard in Hastings shortly before 8 a.m., which was located on a very quiet back road called Rock Lane. The woman waited for someone while sitting in her car for some time. Then another vehicle, a golden Jaguar, appeared in view of the same surveillance camera. It drove past Alex's Mini Cooper and turned toward agricultural lands, after which the woman's car followed the golden Jaguar. The person sitting behind the wheel of that vehicle might have had some information about Alexandra Morgan's disappearance and her current whereabouts. police needed to determine who owned the car and where it was heading that morning. It turned out that near the scrap metal yard, there was a farm called Little Bridge in Hastings. Therefore, instead of the spa center in York, Alex, for some reason, went to this farm. On the evening of November 23rd, 5 days after Alex was declared missing, detectives set out. It took several days to review all video recordings and determine the woman's approximate location. Of course, during this time, she could have gone anywhere from the farm, but the police had at least some lead. Officers arrived at Little Bridge in the evening. They looked around, peeked into barns and sheds, tried calling Alex's name, but there were no signs of anyone's presence on the farm. Neither Alex, nor her Mini Cooper, nor the landowners were visible. After conducting an initial search of the agricultural grounds, police were about to leave empty-handed when a van appeared on the property. A man stepped out of the cabin. He introduced himself as Mark Brown. He appeared to be around 40 years old, and this person rented the Little Bridge farm. He himself lived with his wife and child in another area of Hastings, and came to the farm to work. Mark Brown was a mechanic who repaired old cars and then sold them for a moderate price. The farm had a small workshop, and at the nearby scrapyard, necessary parts could sometimes be found. Just in case, police carefully examined Mark Brown's background and discovered he had no criminal record and had never had any problems with the law. The man seemed like an exemplary family man, but after talking with him, it turned out this wasn't quite true. Mark was the owner of the Golden Jaguar, the car that appeared in surveillance footage on the day Alexandra Morgan disappeared. When detectives began questioning Mark about the missing woman, he didn't deny that on the morning of November 14th, he had indeed met with Alex, and they both came to Little Bridge Farm. Mark was ready to answer all police questions. He admitted that he met Alex on a website called Adult Work, where escort workers could advertise their services and where potential clients could contact them. It turned out that Alex secretly worked in the intimate services industry. Her family and friends hadn't even suspected how the single mother earned her living. Mark Brown first contacted Alex back in June 2021, approximately 5 to 6 months before her disappearance, and they maintained contact throughout this time. On November 14th, the woman did indeed come to Little Bridge, as they had arranged beforehand, to spend several hours with Mark. Then she returned to her car and left the farm. According to Mark Brown, this was the last he saw of her. The woman was alive and well, and he had no idea what might have happened to her after she left his property. At first glance, the farm owner's story seemed truthful. However, soon, police obtained evidence that something didn't add up. As mentioned earlier, surveillance cameras located near the scrapyard had recorded Alex's car driving toward Little Bridge. But the footage showed no instance of her white Mini Cooper moving in the opposite direction that same day. It appeared that Mark Brown had lied to officers. Although Morgan was still not found, the farm owner was detained on suspicion of wrongdoing against the woman. On November 25, 2021, the man was taken to the police station for questioning. Detectives hoped that after arrest, Mark would confess what he had done with Alexandra, since there was no point in lying further. But to almost all questions, Mark responded with a short phrase, "No comment." Police failed to learn anything new from this person. In fact, Mark simply refused to talk about Alexandra. Consequently, detectives needed to figure out for themselves the circumstances of the woman's disappearance and what really connected her with Mark. The entire search was concentrated around Little Bridge Farm. The agricultural grounds covered an area of about 4 acres, where several buildings, sheds, and several transport containers were located. A forest stretched around this. There was also a small lake or pond on the property. So the police had quite many places that needed to be examined. The searches were hampered by the incredible clutter in all buildings. The sheds stored a huge amount of junk that detectives had to examine. They noticed a few items that stood out among the other clutter and garbage. These were weapons, a couple of pistols, and a shotgun. Police also found several rolls of electrical tape, duct tape, and cable ties. If Mark Brown was indeed involved in Alexandra Morgan's disappearance, all these items might have been used against her. But the strangest and most disturbing thing discovered at Little Bridge Farm was inside a transport container. There was something like a small room. An inflatable mattress lay in one corner, and in another was something like a kitchen, a microwave oven and toaster. It gave the impression that someone had lived there. In principle, the farm owner himself could have spent time there. But the strangest thing was that the locks on this container were on the outside. This really troubled the officers. They wondered if someone could have been a prisoner of this strange room. Could Mark Brown have illegally held Alexandra Morgan in the transport container? And where was the woman now? During the investigation, police also conducted a search of Mark's house. Complete disorder reigned there as well. All rooms were cluttered with items. Besides cable ties and rolls of adhesive tape, several handcuffs and hunting knives were found in the house. But most strange, in the attic were several carrier bags filled with human feces. Even if Mark wasn't involved in the woman's disappearance, this finding characterized him as not quite a normal person. Alexandra Morgan's residence in Kent was also searched again. As before, everything looked normal there, no alarming signals. The only thing investigators noticed was a small note left by Alex to one of her sons. The woman invited the boy to go roller skating. Initially, detectives paid no attention to this paper, since there was nothing strange about a mother calling her son for a walk. However, it eventually turned out that this note was a clue that Alex had left for one of her children. She was hinting for him to look for something in the roller skates box. Detectives learned where the boy kept his skates. They found the box under his bed, and besides the skates, there were more than 22,000 pounds in cash hidden in it. Next to it lay another message written by Alex. It stated that this money was intended for her sons in case something happened to her. Most likely, the woman hid the cash in the roller skates box on the day she allegedly headed to the spa center. But why was she afraid that something might happen to her? As now known, Alex was actually heading to Little Bridge Farm. She also indicated the postal code in the note. Did this mean the woman was afraid of Mark Brown? Did it suggest she might not return home after visiting this man's agricultural grounds? Besides money and the note, there was a mobile phone in the box with a PIN code for unlocking written on a piece of paper. Detectives checked the gadget, which Alex probably used to communicate with Mark Brown, and discovered that she used this phone to connect with escort service clients. The messages discussed a filming job for which Alex was promised payment of £100,000 sterling. This sum would have completely changed her life. Before disappearing, Alexandra even made Google searches about what could be purchased with this money, where it could be invested to earn interest. Apparently, Alex agreed to the filming, mentally already planning how to spend the promised amount, but at the same time, her actions clearly showed that she was very nervous and afraid of this offer made by Mark Brown. It's no wonder Alexandra took precautions and left clues in the roller skates box, and her worst fears came true. According to detectives, the woman was dead, and this happened after she arrived at Little Bridge Farm because she didn't leave the farm premises on November 14th, as Mark had claimed. However, on the evening of November 17th, 2021, the farm owner was captured by surveillance camera near the scrapyard, which recorded the man heading somewhere in his white work van. And following him was Alex's car, her white Mini Cooper. Now it remained to find out who was driving Alex's car. Police believed that by that time, the woman was no longer alive. Thanks to phone records, detectives managed to establish that it was Mark's associate, a person named Darren Ripley. Based on tower signals, Darren Ripley and Mark Brown were in this area at the same time. Their mobile devices that evening were moving simultaneously at the same speed, as if they were following each other in cars. Police contacted Darren Ripley and asked him to come to the station for questioning. The man, apparently frightened, was quite sincere with officers. He said that he worked with Mark Brown and often helped him repair old cars for resale. On the evening of November 17th, Mark asked Darren to do him a favor by moving a white Mini Cooper from his property. Darren didn't know whose car it was and assumed it was just being repaired at Little Bridge. He agreed, got behind the wheel, and simply followed Mark. Thus, Alexandra Morgan's Mini Cooper was delivered to an area called Home Horse Lane in Hastings, which was just 4 miles from the farm. Mark asked Darren to park the car on the roadside, after which both men left in Mark's van. As soon as police received this information from Darren Ripley, detectives immediately went to Home Horse Lane and, of course, found the missing woman's white Mini Cooper. Alex herself was nowhere to be found. Officers feared they would find a body in the trunk, but it was empty. The car was immediately towed to the police lot. However, experts found no traces of the owner in the car and no particular evidence of her demise. They only had surveillance camera footage where Mark Brown was essentially disposing of Alexandra Morgan's Mini Cooper. But this still didn't prove that he had somehow dealt with the car's owner. Police didn't know what Mark had actually done with Alex, where he had hidden the body. Therefore, the search for her continued. Law enforcement officers searched the agricultural grounds, sheds, and barns. They even drained the small pond on the farm property, looking for any clues. At the same time, other detectives began checking places where Mark Brown worked. And he worked a little bit everywhere. Besides repairing and selling old cars, this person was listed as a general laborer at a construction site, and this information interested investigators. During Alex's disappearance, Mark Brown was working at a construction site near the town of Sevenoaks in Kent. A house was being built on this plot of land, and there was lots of construction waste. Police wondered if the suspect might have tried to dispose of evidence there. In fact, the people who owned the land reported that Mark had asked them if he could throw away an old dishwasher in their container. They allowed him to do so. However, no dishwasher was found in the construction waste bin. Instead, police found an old burned oil drum. Experts pulled out this barrel and found inside burned remains of some items that someone had clearly tried to destroy. Among them was a woman's bag with something like toiletries, such as deodorant and makeup setting spray, as well as a small hair dryer and several hair clips. Fragments of women's jewelry were also lying there. All these items were sent to the forensic laboratory for examination. DNA analysis showed that all these items had previously belonged to the missing Alexandra Morgan. But the most horrifying thing was that among the half-burned items in this barrel, tiny pieces resembling fragments of human bones were discovered. Unfortunately, these findings were so small that specialists couldn't extract DNA from them to determine whose remains they were. Since they were found in an oil drum alongside Alex's belongings, police were certain they belonged to the missing woman. This certainty was confirmed by Alexandra Morgan's dental records, as fragments of teeth were found along with the bone tissue particles. The forensic expert was able to find evidence that these were Alex's teeth. So now police had a pretty clear picture of what happened to the woman after her death. Mark Brown evidently incinerated her body in that oil drum, which he then attempted to conceal in someone else's waste container. If the construction debris had been removed from the site slightly earlier, the perpetrator would have managed to skillfully hide traces of his crime. He undoubtedly knew how to dispose of the dead woman's body in a way that would leave virtually nothing but a couple of teeth and bone fragments. However, he miscalculated by discarding the drum at his workplace. On November 28th, approximately 2 weeks after Alexandra Morgan's disappearance, Mark Brown was charged with taking the life of the 34-year-old woman. Yet this wasn't the end of it. The investigation concerning this individual remained incomplete, as the police soon made another discovery. Perhaps Alex wasn't actually the perpetrator's only victim. In Mark's work vehicle, his white van, detectives found a prescription medication written for Leah Ware. After examining Leah Ware's identity, police discovered that the woman was considered missing. This became known through statements from her close relatives. By November 2021, no one had seen or heard from her for 6 months already. In May 2021, she seemingly just vanished into thin air. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. Leah Ware was a 32-year-old mother of 3 children. Overall, she was an exceptionally caring and nurturing young woman. Those close to her described her as a cheerful and sociable person who consistently tried to see only the good in people. Unfortunately, many took advantage of this trait, and recently Leah had been experiencing significant mental health challenges. She was diagnosed with depression and bipolar personality disorder. The woman underwent treatment and took prescribed medications. Due to her health issues, Leah lost custody of her children. This circumstance also profoundly impacted her emotional state. However, Ware's loved ones were convinced she would never run away voluntarily. Leah had periods when she disappeared from home temporarily due to intensifying symptoms of her condition. Nevertheless, she always returned. Leah's family didn't formally report her disappearance to the police, hoping she would come back on her own. However, when Mark Brown's van revealed her prescription medication, authorities became alarmed and questioned whether something more sinister had happened to her. Could Mark have taken her life just as he did with Alexandra Morgan? Sussex Police Department, which by this point was participating in the investigation alongside Kent Police, contacted Mark Brown while he was in custody for the assault on Alex, and requested him to share what he knew about Leah Ware and her current whereabouts. Brown stated he had no idea where she was now, but admitted he knew Leah and even at one point had been in a relationship with her and looked after her. They allegedly met when Leah began experiencing mental health problems, and the man helped her overcome difficulties. After that, they separated. Detectives didn't believe Mark's story and began digging deeper. The investigation revealed that Mark met Leah in the same way as Alex. Leah performed escort work and was registered on the Adult Work website. It turned out Mark Brown communicated with several different ladies through this site, meeting them and paying for intimate services. Detectives approached the women and asked them to share their impressions of this client. One woman described how once during intercourse, Mark Brown wrapped his hands around her neck and began squeezing so hard that she became genuinely frightened. She tapped his hand, but the man didn't stop or loosen his grip. At that moment, the woman had already bid farewell to life. Fortunately, she later regained consciousness. Examining Mark's electronic devices, such as his computer and mobile phone, police discovered very disturbing information in the search history. According to browser records, Mark was aroused by adult films containing elements of violence. This revealed what a sick and perverted mind this person had, what scenes excited him, and at the core was the idea of complete power and control over women whom he found on the Adult Work website. As previously mentioned, she and Mark met and made contact through the website. Mark sent her a message in March 2018, more than 3 years before her disappearance. From that point on, they began meeting regularly. Over time, this genuinely evolved into something more than just physical intimacy. Despite Mark already having a wife and child, he simply led a double life. Mark even purchased a trailer for his girlfriend Leah to live in occasionally, and placed it at Little Bridge Farm. The woman settled there with her animals. Leah Ware was a great enthusiast of 4-legged companions. She adored them. She had 3 goats, a horse, and 2 dogs, an elderly mastiff and a Pomeranian Spitz. Leah stayed in this trailer at Little Bridge Farm until the owners, from whom Mark rented his workshop, discovered this. They disapproved of someone settling on their property without their consent and asked for the trailer to be removed. But instead of selling the mobile home or relocating it somewhere, Mark simply burned it. Leah had nowhere to live, so Mark conceived the idea of housing her in a shipping container on the same farm. The man brought her medications, water, and food. He prohibited her from leaving without his knowledge or bringing friends there. He essentially isolated the woman from everyone, making her a voluntary prisoner in a cell. When his mood deteriorated or problems arose, Mark directed all his anger at Leah. Police had already seen this tiny living space on the farm, which contained an air mattress and something resembling a kitchen. They were surprised that the locks on this makeshift dwelling secured from the outside rather than the inside. Mark deliberately installed fasteners on the external side of Leah's room door, which gave police even more insight into the relationship between these two people. Clearly, the man treated Leah as if she were some kind of animal that could simply be locked in a cage. So now, when detectives were almost certain that Mark Brown had done something to Leah, they began searching Little Bridge Farm anew, looking for evidence pertaining to yet another missing woman. Once again, while combing the surroundings, search teams stumbled upon something resembling bones in the forest encircling the farm. However, these weren't human remains. Analysis determined that the bones belonged to an animal. Police speculated it might have been one of Leah's dogs, her little Pomeranian Spitz. A small pink collar was found nearby, attached to a massive heavy chain with a 12-kilogram weight. Most likely, Mark disposed of the small dog in this manner. He tied an unbearable weight to its collar and left it alone to perish in the forest. Detectives still had no idea what happened to Leah. They didn't know if Mark might have treated his girlfriend similarly, leaving her somewhere abandoned in the woods to be torn apart by wild animals, as he had done with her beloved dog. So they decided to ask Mark directly. But just like before, when discussing Alexandra Morgan, Mark responded to all questions with a single phrase: "No comment." He withdrew into himself and said nothing more to the police. So investigators were left with no choice but to continue searching for evidence and forming their own theories. Police examined Leah Ware's phone records to try to establish an approximate date of her death. Since detectives had little doubt the woman was no longer alive, Leah vanished in May 2021. They determined that her mobile phone was last active on May 8th, and the previous evening, May 7th, the geolocation of Mark's and Leah's phones matched. According to the markers, they were in the same location at Little Bridge Farm until they suddenly disconnected from the network at the same time. This led police to suspect that both Mark and Leah were inside the shipping container. When the door was closed, mobile devices lost signal. Most likely, that night marked the tragic end of Leah Ware's life. It's believed that after the assault, Mark opened the shipping container door, which restored the signal to both phones. But while Mark's mobile remained connected, Leah's signal cut off again, because the door closed, and the phone remained lying next to the lifeless body. This indicated that the woman never left her makeshift cell again. And once the door shut, the signal on her phone disappeared again and never returned. After this, Leah was never seen again. Police determined the time and date of her death as the evening of May 7th, 2021. After Leah's death, Mark continued living his normal life. It was also discovered that after the woman's disappearance, he took her debit card and withdrew all money from her bank account. Mark continued obtaining anxiety and depression medications using prescriptions written in Leah's name to make it appear as though she were alive. But what the man did with Leah and how he disposed of the body after death remained a mystery, at least until detectives took testimony from one specific person from Mark's life. After Leah's disappearance, Mark began communicating on social media with a former classmate named Beth. They attended school together and were very close friends at the time. When schooling ended, as often happens, the friends lost all contact. Detectives discovered from Mark's phone records that in June 2021, he reconnected with Beth and started messaging her online. The former friends reminisced about their fun times in school, shared their accomplishments, and talked about life, attempting to revive their friendship. In her messages, Beth revealed she was going through difficult times. She had recently divorced her husband and was now struggling to handle the situation alone with her children. Mark offered his support, promised to always be there, and even invited her to visit the farm he rented with her children to spend weekends together. Gradually, their relationship transformed from friendship into something more intimate. Police decided to speak with this woman and inquire whether Beth knew anything about Mark's previous lover. Strangely, Beth immediately told officers that Leah was dead, although there was no official confirmation that Leah wasn't alive. She was still listed as missing, and her presumed death hadn't been made public. To further detective questions, Beth stated that Mark had informed her of Leah's death and showed investigators her lover's messages. One of them particularly interested the detectives. The message was sent in June 2021, a month after Leah's disappearance. According to it, Leah's body was disposed of in the same way as Alex Morgan's later would be, burned in an oil drum. In fact, Beth never fully understood the message's meaning. It stated that an old oil drum and 5 liters of diesel fuel had solved all Mark's problems. Mark was essentially confessing to his crime. He wrote that he had committed monstrous acts that now weighed heavily on his heart, head, and soul. The man called himself a psychopath with a conscience, then told his girlfriend it was all a joke. Beth hadn't communicated with Mark for a long time, so she didn't even realize he had confessed to her how he concealed human remains and evidence of the crime. She couldn't comprehend these messages' meaning and assumed Mark was emotional about the breakup and had burned his former lover's possessions. In February 2022, 3 months after Mark Brown was arrested and charged with Alexandra Morgan's murder, he was also charged with taking Leah Ware's life. Although her body wasn't found, police were confident in their collected evidence. Everything indicated that this woman was no longer alive. Presumably, the man intended to make Beth his third victim. He began courting her in the same way he had done with Leah and Alex, initially offering friendship and financial support. If police hadn't stopped this individual, he could have easily become a serial offender. So Beth didn't even realize what tragic fate she had managed to avoid. Mark Brown's trial concluded in late 2022. His attorney attempted to present Alex's death as an accident. Allegedly, the woman slipped on some tools in the workshop and hit her head. His client panicked and, not understanding what he was doing, disposed of the body. And regarding Leah Ware, he claimed that the woman was alive and had gone traveling with some friends. Fortunately, the jury didn't believe him, as the attorney couldn't substantiate his claims. Ultimately, Mark was found guilty of both crimes. It was proven that the tragic deaths of Alexandra Morgan and Leah Ware were the defendant's doing. The man received 2 49-year sentences for each crime to be served concurrently. The sentence reflected the repugnant nature of his crimes and ensured he couldn't harm other women for the rest of his life. Before pronouncing the verdict, the judge offered Mark Brown a chance to reveal the truth about what he did with Leah's body to give her family the opportunity to lay her to rest, and promised to consider this when passing sentence. However, Mark refused to disclose Leah's remains location, and therefore to this day, her body has never been found. Mark Brown didn't appear in court for sentencing, unwilling to hear the victims' families accuse him of murder. He simply wanted to remain in his prison cell. The criminal was too cowardly to face those whose lives he had destroyed. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon. Would you ever want to venture inside the terrifying dungeons and torture chambers that serial offenders use to torment their victims? Today, you will experience all the horror of these places as we delve into the dreadful world of serial predator Maury Travis. Imagine renting a cozy house somewhere in the suburbs. The rental fee turned out to be quite comfortable for your wallet. So you're rejoicing at this lucky chance, breathing fresh, unpolluted air enjoying birdsong in the mornings, admiring the view from your window. One day you turn on the television, and in the crime report appears a photograph of your house, which they refer to as nothing other than Travis's House of Horrors. Maury Troy Travis was born October 25, 1965, in St. Louis. Until age 11, the boy lived with his parents Sandra and Michael in the Carr Square residential complex. In 1976, during the period of suburbanization, when a huge portion of the city's population began moving to the suburbs, tired of constant noise, polluted air, and lack of greenery, the boy's mother and father also decided to purchase a simple ranch-style house in Ferguson. They believed they would be more comfortable living in fresh air, away from the big city center. New life close to nature began quite favorably for the Travis family. They busied themselves setting up their new dwelling, making friends, and raising their son. Many remembered Maury as a very quiet, withdrawn, and shy boy. He always respectfully greeted neighbors, and they considered him a sweet child with a kind heart. No one could even imagine that subsequently the young man would transform into a brutal monster. Apparently, the change in environment somehow affected the boy's parents, because 2 years after moving, they unexpectedly divorced. Maury remained under the full custody of his mother. His isolation became even more pronounced when throughout his childhood and youth, the boy changed several different schools, and his photographs weren't found in any yearbook. They say still waters run deep. This phrase perfectly described Maury Travis. Outwardly quiet, modest teenager who wouldn't hurt a fly, harbored rather sinister thoughts. Starting from age 13, he began showing interest in what death means. The young man often fantasized whether he could take someone's life, and began actualizing his sick fantasies on animals he found nearby. During that period, many neighbors' cats and dogs started disappearing. After finishing high school, Travis enlisted in the armed forces, serving 2 years as a medic and dental assistant. After discharge from the military, Maury briefly worked at a transport company, then took a position as a volunteer at a local nursing home. During that period, the young man suddenly realized that his life represented a series of random moments and lacked overall direction. Therefore, at age 22, Travis enrolled in Morris Brown College in Atlanta, Georgia. However, having chosen what seemed to be the right path, he very quickly went downhill, becoming involved with prohibited substances. But where would a poor college student get money to support this harmful addiction? Desperately needing funds, Maury turned to crime. Thus, while home during spring break over 8 days, he robbed 5 different shoe stores in northern and western St. Louis. Travis was easily identified when a witness to one of the robberies provided his description and named the car make. Police arrested Maury. The young man didn't deny it, but immediately confessed to everything. At trial, attempting to evoke sympathy and some leniency, Maury said he had been anxious and barely remembered anything about these crimes. To commit the robberies, he used only a plastic toy gun and thought he would get away with it. In addition to the allegedly slightly misguided student, the judge received several letters of support from people who knew Maury. They stated that the unlawful actions didn't reflect Maury's true character, that he was actually a good person, and only prohibited substances had clouded his mind. The letters urged the court to offer him help instead of harsh punishment. When 6 months later Maury appeared before the judge for sentencing, he reported that he had completed rehabilitation and was now clean. All his recent time was spent only on becoming a useful member of society. Even former American politician from Missouri, William Lacey Clay, intervened on his behalf, writing the judge a letter requesting clemency. The congressman stated that Maury posed no threat to society and asked to grant him probation with the condition of voluntary service at a charitable community agency. However, the judge wasn't convinced by all these letters defending the accused, and he sentenced Maury Travis to 15 years imprisonment. This happened just 4 months before the young man's 24th birthday. Maury hadn't expected that he would be celebrating his birthday in a prison cell, so he immediately began making attempts to appeal the sentence. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. 2 months after being confined to the correctional facility, Maury wrote a letter to the judge, tearfully begging him to reduce the sentence and describing the harsh conditions of prison confinement. He complained that daily and hourly he contemplated the possibility of taking his own life. Maury spent his entire day in the cell and cried about his fate almost every night. He also mentioned harassment from other inmates, about inedible poor food, and about the absence of any conditions for normal living. At the end of the letter, Maury implored the judge to give him another chance in society, to replace his current 15-year term with a term of 120 to 180 days, because this time would be sufficient for him to learn his lesson once and for all. However, his pleas for clemency remained unheeded, and Maury was forced to adapt to his new environment. Understanding that he couldn't escape prison, Maury simply decided to behave reservedly, keep his head down, and quietly serve his time. However, he wasn't good at this either, because during the first couple years behind bars, he received 13 warnings for behavioral violations. Despite this, in June 1994, after serving 5 years and 3 months, Maury was released on parole. Maury moved into a duplex 2-level house for 2 families, which he shared with neighbor Linda Harris. According to Linda, Maury was an excellent neighbor, quiet, friendly, didn't bring anyone over or throw parties, never bothered anyone. In their house was a shared basement where the washer and dryer were located. Once, when Linda was downstairs, the neighbor scared her so much with his unexpected appearance that after that incident, he always descended the stairs whistling some melody. He apologized for a long time afterward for making the elderly woman nervous. Linda's son also got along perfectly with Travis. A friendly relationship developed between them. The men often sat together on the porch, chatting and drinking beer. Despite how terribly illegal substances had derailed Maury's life, after some time he again became addicted to white powder, and again, everything went wrong. 4 years after release from prison, Maury violated his parole conditions and found himself behind bars again, receiving a short sentence for possession of prohibited substances. By 1999, Maury was released from confinement. For some time, he was recovering, not knowing what to do. And in summer 2000, he got a job as a waiter at a restaurant located inside a hotel near downtown. There, he had several strange conversations with his colleague Dave. Once Maury mentioned that if he ever needed to dispose of items that nobody should find, he could do it in East St. Louis, because there weren't many police officers there. And a few months after this conversation, a dead body was discovered there. Dave's girlfriend worked as an intern at a news channel, and once during a meeting, Maury asked her if her channel had covered any reports about killings of women of loose morals in East St. Louis. Nothing like this had appeared in the media, so how could Maury know about this? And on July 1st, 2000, the body of 61-year-old Mary Shields was discovered in East St. Louis. And now Dave and his journalist girlfriend wondered, was this somehow connected to what Maury had said, or was it just a coincidence? Meanwhile, Maury settled in a house at 1001 Fort Drive, St. Louis, Missouri, belonging to his family. This building had a basement, and the man, obsessed since his teenage years with harming those weaker than him, began conducting his dark deeds, only now on a larger scale than in childhood. Maury transformed the basement in his house into a sort of torture chamber. On days when he wasn't working at the restaurant, the man would walk the streets and pick up women offering intimate services for money. He would drive them to his home, get pleasure, and then, instead of paying, would lock them in the basement, where he performed all sorts of perverted acts. Maury recorded all their moral and physical torments on tape. Sometimes he forced women to participate in strange rituals, dressed them in white clothes and sunglasses, and demanded they perform some wild dances. When the next victim bored the predator, he would simply dispose of her. Fortunately, 4 months after Mary Shields was found, Travis was once again arrested for violating parole conditions and was sent back to prison. This time he spent several months behind bars from November 29, 2000 to March 19, 2001. And as soon as he was freed, Maury immediately returned to his dark deeds. Less than 2 weeks after his release from imprisonment, Alicia Grainwaite's remains were discovered in Washington Park. 3 days after this, another woman's dead body was found in East St. Louis, and they were never able to identify her. From May to October 2001, 4 more women endured torture and strangulation: Teresa Wilson, Veronica Thompson, Yvonne Cruz, and Brenda Beasley. On one woman's leg remained traces of car tire treads, and swabs taken from 2 dead bodies showed the presence of seminal fluid. This allowed investigators to isolate the suspect's DNA. However, apparently, the abuse and killings of women of loose morals seemed insufficient to Maury. He really wanted all newspapers to write about him as a serial predator, for his atrocities to be covered in the news. Police officers working on this case initially didn't connect all the deaths together, examining each case separately. And it's possible that Maury might never have answered for his crimes, but the rays of glory so clouded his mind that he decided to play cat and mouse with the detectives. At that time, a newspaper had recently published an article about one of his victims, Teresa Wilson. After reading the note about the woman who died by his hands, Maury printed a map from the internet, marked the location of yet undiscovered remains of another victim, then anonymously mailed it to the journalist who wrote the article. From the very first phrases, it became crystal clear that Maury felt no remorse toward his victims. Instead, the man was proud of his crimes, actively seeking notoriety. The reporter who received the strange message immediately handed it to police. The response team, investigating the location indicated on the map, found another set of skeletal remains belonging to an unidentified victim. Learning that the map was printed from a specific website, detectives managed to determine the IP address of the computer where the download occurred. Several days later came a response with a single IP address. The computer from which the download occurred was located at 1001 Fort Drive in St. Louis, Missouri. This was the house where previously convicted Maury Travis resided. Early morning on June 7th, officers knocked on the door of the suspected serial predator. The obviously just awakened homeowner answered the knock. He was quite aggressive, demanding police state a compelling reason for disturbing his sleep. No trace remained of the nice, withdrawn young man that most people who knew Maury described him as. When officers showed him the letter with the area map, he pretended it had nothing to do with him and was about to slam the door in the detectives' faces. But at that moment, they explained that the person who sent the letter did it from Maury's computer. The homeowner had no choice but to let the police inside. During the hour-and-a-half conversation, Maury tried to keep the discussion under his control. He frequently changed topics when asked uncomfortable questions, and was practically certain he had managed to deceive the investigators, when suddenly there was another knock at the door. It was the investigation team with a search warrant. That's when Maury showed his true face. He began using profanity and getting angry that he had opened the doors to them at all. At that moment, the detectives already knew they would find something. This was evident from the homeowner's reaction. And very soon, forensics discovered bloodstains in the basement on the floor, walls, under the carpet, and on the carpet's underside. This was blood from not one person, but different people. While experts searched the ground floor, upstairs detectives were still talking with Maury. They showed him a folder with several photographs of women whom police considered his victims. Without any context, detectives asked Maury if he knew any of the people in the photos. The man carelessly looked at all the photographs and stated he had never seen them in his life. However, about 10 minutes after the conversation had moved to something else, Maury asked if he could look at the pictures of the dead girls again. Detectives immediately caught him on his words. After all, they hadn't said that all these women were no longer alive. Maury immediately realized he had slipped up. He lowered his head, was silent for a couple seconds, then said he would show them the location of another victim in East St. Louis. On the way, the man confessed that he committed his first killing at age 19. It was an indescribable sensation of power and superiority. When the car was already approaching the bridge, following Maury's directions, he unexpectedly changed his mind, stating they should just take him to jail. After brief arguments, investigators understood that Maury wasn't going to show them anything. They took him to the police station and continued questioning. To obtain a DNA sample, officers pulled an old trick with a drink. The suspect was given a soda can, which he immediately drank, throwing it into the trash bin. A bit later, the empty container was retrieved from the basket and sent for testing, to extract DNA and compare it with DNA taken from the deceased women. The samples matched. After this, authorities confiscated Maury's vehicle, and the tire tread pattern on it matched the imprint left on one victim's leg. Thus, detectives managed to link Maury Travis to 3 specific women. And in the house on Fort Drive, a thorough search was still ongoing. A forensics team found several videotapes. One was labeled "Our Wedding Day." At the beginning of the recording, there actually was someone's wedding ceremony, but after a couple minutes of viewing, the recording cut off and switched to something completely different. The footage showed a woman chained to a wooden post. Everything that happened next was so horrific and shocking that officers who viewed the tapes were recommended to undergo psychological counseling. After viewing the recordings, the number of Travis's presumed victims jumped to 12 women. Investigators also discovered torture tools in the house, a stun gun, newspaper clippings about some of his crimes, and videotapes where Maury tormented his captives. The criminal didn't just physically torture his victims, he also subjected them to psychological abuse. In one of the videos, Travis mocked a woman, asking if she wanted to say anything to her children and who was raising them while she spent time in his house. After abuse and torment, Maury simply took his victims' lives, then usually disposed of their bodies on the eastern outskirts of St. Louis. When Maury was charged and shown the collected evidence, he realized he would have no possibility of winning this case. Maury absolutely didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. He knew that behind bars, things wouldn't be easy for him. Although St. Louis County Jail management was warned that Maury should be placed under increased surveillance, the precautionary measures proved insufficient. On June 10, 2002, before facing trial for his crimes, Maury Troy Travis ended his life by hanging himself with sheets in his prison cell. The man left behind a letter to his mother, apologizing for all the pain he had caused her. In the message, Maury described how he had fantasized about such things since he turned 13 years old. Maury himself didn't understand where such thoughts in his head came from. Never in his life had he felt normal or happy. He considered his departure the best solution in the situation. Meanwhile, the perpetrator didn't mention a word about his victims. He didn't regret any of the stolen lives and felt no remorse. Maury wasn't concerned that he had caused anyone pain except his mother. Unfortunately, the true number of Maury Travis's victims will remain a mystery, although in the letter to his mother, he claimed he had sent 17 women to the other world. Some believe the number of victims was around 20 people. 12 years after Maury went straight to hell, the house where he had lived recently was put up for sale. A young woman named Katrina McHoe rented the dwelling, not knowing who had lived there before. Maury's mother, Sandra Travis, rented her the property without revealing its history. One evening, Katrina settled in at home in front of the television. While watching the documentary Unsolved Cases, she suddenly saw photographs on screen of the house where she was currently located. Her hair stood on end with horror when she learned that in the basement, Literally under her feet, several people had been deprived of life. The film showed the wooden post that still stood downstairs in the basement, and near this post, Katrina's 2-year-old daughter often played. The woman was so frightened and upset that she wanted to immediately terminate the lease agreement. She contacted Sandra Travis, explained the situation, thinking the homeowner would be understanding. Instead, she heard that she must stay in the house until the lease expired or pay the specified amount for the entire term. Later, the St. Louis Housing Authority intervened in this case, and Katrina was allowed to leave. On a real estate website, it's indicated that a month later Maury's house was still sold. The house price wasn't disclosed. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.